Right, welcome to the Explainer. We're getting straight into it today. Ireland's cost of living squeeze. Let's go.
Zero. That is exactly how much actual prices have dropped for the Irish working family. I know, despite all those massive headlines you're seeing about falling inflation and a cooling economy, the reality at the kitchen table is a big fat zero when it comes to actual relief. Today, we're going to figure out exactly why that is.
So here's the roadmap for this explainer. 1. The temporary cost myth. 2. Ireland's structural squeeze. 3. The great asset divide. 4. Inflation down, prices up. And 5. Accepting the new normal. By the end of this, you'll know exactly why everything feels so unbelievably dear in this country right now and why this squeeze might just be permanent.
Section 1. The temporary cost myth. Is the spike now the baseline? Sure, for ages we all just assumed these rising prices were a cycle. You know yourself.
We thought prices would go up, we'd have a bit of a shock, they'd stabilize, and then, they'd come back down. But there is a massive difference between what we expected and what's actually happening. A temporary shock is when prices spike and eventually return to normal. But a structural baseline, that's totally different. That is when costs bake themselves permanently into the system. They don't disappear, they just settle, and they stay at a higher level. And what we're experiencing in Ireland right now feels very distinctly like a structural baseline.
Which brings us to Section 2, Ireland's structural squeeze. Why exactly do costs stay so high?
Well, we've got a few big macro drivers keeping us trapped in this new normal. First off, persistent housing shortages. Demand is miles ahead of supply year after year, so prices are just kept artificially high. Then you have global energy volatility. Because we're a small, open economy that relies heavily on imports, global choke points like the Strait of Hormuz literally dictate the price of oil, transport, and food right here at home. You throw in domestic planning constraints and rising service costs, and you've got a perfect storm locking prices sky high.
And it creates this classic, vicious little trap. Step 1. Living costs rise. Step 2. Workers naturally feel the pinch and push for higher pay, so wages follow costs. Step 3. Businesses are now facing higher payrolls, so what do? They pass those higher wage bills right back onto the consumer. And Step 4. Prices don't fall. They just stabilize at a newly minted, much higher level. So that bump in your take-home pay, it just ends up cementing dearer prices across the board. But here is the real sting for the working family. We rely heavily on income-based taxation in Ireland. So, as your wages finally go up to meet the cost of living, the tax man takes a bigger slice, shrinking your net gain. Throw in unrelenting housing costs and those rising service fees like childcare or basic maintenance, and you're left feeling the exact same level of pressure, even with a bigger paycheck in your hand. It's like running on a treadmill.
Section 3. The great asset divide, or the two Irelands. Because let's be honest, these structural issues do not hit everyone equally.
We're looking at a stark divide right now. On one side, you have the asset owners, people with property and investments. In a high-cost, high-price environment, they often see their wealth grow as their assets actually appreciate. But on the flip side, you have working families, renters, and young workers just trying to enter the economy. They are the ones absorbing the heavy blows of this new baseline, paying those elevated costs every single day with absolutely none of the upside. The gap between these two groups is just widening.
Which really leads me to ask, does macro strength actually equal micro comfort? We hear it all the time, don't we? Ireland's booming economy, massive GDP growth, high employment, unbelievable foreign investment. But there's a massive disconnect between that national macro strength and the completely stretched micro reality at the kitchen table. The economy can be flying on paper, while ordinary people feel totally squeezed in their daily lives.
On to Section 4. Inflation down, prices up. The math of the squeeze.
This is exactly why you're still feeling broke, despite the good news on the telly. Let's bust the biggest myth out there right now. Think about the past cost of your goods, nice and low. Then we hit peak inflation, which was a massive spike. Now, look at the current costs with quote-unquote lower inflation. It hasn't dropped back down to the old baseline at all. Falling inflation absolutely does not mean your weekly shop gets cheaper. It just means prices are rising a bit slower than they were at the peak. They're still astronomically high.
Our source material puts the public's frustration perfectly. Quote, people hear that inflation is down but don't feel any relief because prices haven't dropped. It completely validates what working families have been giving out about. Your lived reality is totally correct, no matter what the rosy economic headlines say.
Section 5.
Accepting the new normal. Adaptation and consequence.
When people are forced to just expect these high costs, you see a profound behavioral shift. Ordinary families are having to adapt. They're saving less money, budgeting much tighter, lowering their overall expectations, and delaying massive life decisions like having kids or buying a house. And through sheer exhausting repetition, what was once considered outrageously expensive simply starts to feel normal.
So we have to completely redefine what normal actually means for us now. Normal is defined by consistency, not by comfort. This new normal isn't about things being affordable, and it certainly isn't about being comfortable. It just means this is the permanent baseline that we consistently have to operate from. We adapt, and the baseline just sets like concrete.
And this isn't just a modern Irish phenomenon either. There's historical precedent for this. Our sources point out that adapted systems rarely revert. If you look back at totally different contexts and eras, even as specific as German colonial possessions, once operating costs increased and as systems adapted to them, the previous lower baseline was rarely, if ever, restored. It's a different era, but the exact same economic dynamic. Once a system adapts to high costs, it almost never goes back.
So I want to leave you with this thought. We've seen exactly how wages get eaten up and how prices settle high. If the working family can no longer out-earn the baseline, how does Irish society fundamentally change? How we adapt to this new normal and who gets left behind will define the future of this country. Thanks a million for joining me for this explainer. Mind yourselves, and I'll see you on the next one.